Okay, I want to cover a little bit of material here involving some understanding here. We have a new book that is out here, basically, and we have a lecture being given at the Heritage Foundation, China's Epic Intelligence Heist, insight from David Shed. Now, this guy is actually really good because he has basically tracked on a whole lot of things that I've looked at myself. So now some people are not totally on with some of the research that goes on with the Heritage Foundation and the different things. They're very large, actually. They're enormously large. And, I had some people that flipped out once when they found out that that in my resume that it included that I worked for the Heritage Foundation at one time, and when I was in Arkansas. And this is something where I told people, I says, well, you're getting alarmist here. Why are you getting alarmist? And some people, they didn't understand because they thought there was a disproportionate number of people of faith, basically, and they're like totally paranoid of many Christians and stuff. So, I was having one of those types of conversations. And I had to explain to him, I says, well, actually, what I was doing when I worked for Heritage is I was trying to come up with more money to keep the archive afloat. And I took some phone sales work. And they do a lot of charity phone sales work. As well. So, I laid it out and I says, this is not that I didn't necessarily have certain other opportunities, but I wanted to basically get people to calm down because we have people that they're overreactionary. We have people that are basically incredibly emotional about things where they're losing their head, basically. And it's really a problem. I've talked a little bit about part of the Marxism factor, that it's like a basically false church, that you have these people that are so deep into Marxism that they just suck it into their head. And so they basically are running around with Marxism, with Marx in their head. And you try to explain to people what's wrong with that, and they don't understand. They don't understand about the Royal German Empire Spy Institute. They don't understand the origins of communism and socialism. And it's important to understand a lot of this because we have a lot of people that they just don't really have a clue. They think that communism and socialisms are these things that were thought of thousands of years ago by philosophers, and you have to sit them down and actually give a fairly lengthy lecture to explain to them that, by the way, what happens is when the Royal German Empire Spy Institute, in conjunction with their various syndicate buddies, not including banking, that's the banking on certain things, but this was a different way of handling. People immediately jump to the banking thing, and I'm like, no, I think you're still missing the point here. The bankers are superchargers. It's a way different style of what I'm talking about as far as involvement there. And so people didn't understand that it was a mass weaponization of data. The German Empire Spy Institute is an incredible example of one of the most intensive, one of the most, basically one of the largest mechanizations and weaponization type operations to ever hit planet Earth. And this is because the Germans made a lot of decisions respective to how are we going to be able to move forward with our idea of some kind of reasonable clandestine operations to change our destiny dramatically, because we don't have land proportionately compared to everybody else. So they were playing the underdog item They're looking at Russia, it's massive, and they're looking at the United States, and we're massive. And they were looking at China a little bit, but they weren't so much really interested in China at the same levels. So they engineered something. They engineered what is communism and socialism today is a mechanism. The few references that people make respective to communism and socialism in the past, in the far past, those are as though a paragraph, a notion, just in passing, because the weaponization done by the German Spy Institute is something that's mind-boggling. The way that they would do these things, they have more than 200 people usually at any given time in the institute working, and they had these areas where they had large tactical tables, and they had all of these books lining the walls, and they had all of these tables that were just full of books and materials, and they would lay stuff out. So they had all of these different tables that are just imagine a room full of pool tables, and that's basically roughly the size equivalent of what they had. And they would work with humans the same way we would work with computers today, the same way that you might work with a bunch of different high-end AIs. In other words, if one tactical table was Google, Gemini, and another tactical table was OpenAI, and another tactical table was Grok, and another tactical table, this is the kind of collective reasoning power that they were working with, because they were using human beings. So you have all these people that have these incredible degrees, basically, and into this you have like 30 military psychiatrist types. These guys, dark-hearted, they would make today's character of Lecter Hannibal comparative to them. He would look like a little Cub Scout. We're talking people dark-hearted. We're talking people that are evolving plans, and they know what they're doing. They know that they're creating mechanisms that are going to end up slaughtering tens of millions of people. Literally scales that are mind-boggling. They know all about this, And the way they look at stuff is when they tactical table stuff, they're looking at an entire city, country, whatever it is, and they want to manipulate everything about it, and this is done with data, because they're going to actually try to do the puppeting of everything they possibly can. And I'm not joking about this. This is an ultimate tactical management situation, and you would see it manifest in Germany, as you would have these different groups and manifesting, and they infiltrated all these groups, and they laid out money. They supplied money to puppet these organizations, and they would get perks out of it, because they're going to know who wants to basically harbor this emotion or that emotion or some kind of emotion against somebody else. So they're going to have the master tactical understanding. So the way they would work with it is to control it, to literally control it. And this means that they are involved in the decisions about what happens to certain people. What sub-factional interests are going to end up becoming targeted. And they're going to monitor and see the reaction of citizens and see how they perceive what's going on. They're going to monitor the insides of these organizations to understand any possible threats. So all of these organizations, they're actually creating them. So here we have, RGE basically puppeting everything. And if it's not to their liking, they assassinate people. They do whatever's necessary and then inject somebody else in. So all of these designs are actually dictatorial mechanisms. There is no real democracy or elective capability of it. To RGE, elections and democracy were something to manipulate. They were a tool that they could use as an invitation. They were nothing but a big, huge flaw of how they could come in and manipulate the public, manipulate people who are ignorant to take maximum advantage. So as they would be doing all of this different type of puppeting, basically, they literally would start giving more funding in one place, less funding in another one. So here they're not just sticking their toes in the water. They're doing any combination of whatever they think is necessary to manipulate the situation. So into this, this is just, just to try to start out to begin with, giving you a scale of the way they would think and how they would involve themselves and how they would think about, well, how do we look at becoming multifaceted to the point where they would say, okay, can we make all of these individual operations return a profit? In other words, make a buck out of it. And this became a joining and a creating of a new type of management process that gave them incredible leverage. So as they would do things such as basically getting a hold of data, they would do anything and everything. So they would partner with many different people. They would find ways to extract profits in unique ways. They would constantly make deals with their partners and investors, many of which were, by the way, chemical plants, pharmaceutical companies, etc. So when it came to how do we come up with money and we're short on money, hey, let's go to the pharmaceutical people and say, look, we want to penetrate deeply into all scholastic areas. Particularly, we want to focus on medical areas. So what we need you to do is be a player with us, partner with us, because we want to capture the data because it's useful. So we need you to give us a whole lot of pharmaceuticals that you are producing for next to nothing, so we can basically use it as currency. And the pharmaceutical company says, well, what do we get out of it? And they says, we share everything with you. You have a seat. Come on down. We all parlay around the RGE Institute, Royal German Empire Spy Institute. And they're like, okay, seats. So they come down and they meet and they see what's going on. And all of a sudden, real fast, they come to the conclusion, hey, we're all the way. We are in deep, deep, deep. This is the max possible access and sharing we could possibly get. So they go back and they tell the rest of management and they tell other investors, sub-investors in their affairs, we have an ultimate deal here. Now we need to keep this hush-hush, but it's really good. And they explain parts of it. So you end up having pharmaceutical companies going, this is great, we can produce these chemicals for pennies, So, basically running around, if you can imagine printing currency, except what you were doing, or what they were doing at the time, technically was legal. So in other words, $100 worth of pharmaceuticals was $1. This is the miracle of basically manufacturing. So they said, fine, we're on board. So now you have various representatives, and they would switch off. They turn around and say, well, it's a big area. Here we go. We have a map. Here we are down at the Spy Institute. Well, here's the city. Here's several cities. And here's the players we think at certain locations that we want to talk to. But we need more information. We need all the data, all the information. So let's break this up. Tell you what, let's break this up. What we need to do is get a list where we have your salespeople, your consultants, your experts in the pharmaceutical companies on the same page with what we're doing. We need to exchange business cards so that when we send teams in and tell them that, oh, doctor, we're sponsoring some contest and we want to see and help scholastic interest move forward. So we want to sponsor papers and scholars and all kinds of stuff. So they come in there and they, here it is. They're going to go in there and all of a sudden it's like, well, doc, yeah, it's pretty good. Hey, look, I got some guys with me here. By the way, I also have some stuff going part-time with this pharmaceutical company. Here's a card. These guys will take care of you. You just tell them that I'm sending you, and they're going to give you a really good discount. Here, let me bring these 2 steamer trunks in. We have some laboratory equipment. We got some lab coats and some gloves. And, here, open them up, Charlie. Charlie, open them up. And he opens it up. It says, and as you can see, we have an array of pharmaceuticals also included here. Now, we're going to take care of you, and we want you to help take care of us. So all of a sudden, these are the kind of things where you got people deeply on board, deeply involved, to work with this giant mechanism. And for the most part, back then, we're talking about the beginning, I would say roughly around 1840. You had a lot of activity between, say, 1840 to 1860. And most of the world really didn't have a clue what the Spy Institute was dealing with. People didn't even necessarily even know it existed yet. When people think of the RGE Spy Institute, they're thinking about what ends up happening and just prior to World War I. But there was other activities coming into being far earlier. So here you have the earliest stages of people getting together for clandestine plans. And there's a lot of references to this, by the way. You have references respective to people's journals and whatnot, parties they went to, and they would mix. They'd go to parties in other countries. They would mix with other royals. They would bring friends along. I mean, see, there was nothing like running around and having something that you could hand out like candy, high-quality pharmaceuticals. And people go, gee, that sounds like a bunch of drug dealing. But, in the 1800s, this was not stuff that was regulated. It was a completely different situation. So it was a wide open door. So they would go to parties and the guy turn around and say, oh, well, I've got several new types of snuff right here. This is the newest thing. Here, try a sniff of this. And people, because people back then would go places and they would wear all these thick clothes and they would stink, quite frankly. I don't know any other way than to just say that. Okay, people would smell, and so everybody was basically using something to disguise what other people would smell like. And it's not even funny. So, I mean, now, this is not to say that these people didn't go take a bath and get all cleaned up, but when you decide that you're going to start wearing so many clothes that it becomes this completely, utterly ridiculous situation, especially if you're wearing wigs and other stuff like that, you end up sweating quick, and it gets really nasty. So snuff is like a really big thing that people would pass around. This is just the way things were back then. But mixed into this, of course, is what? Pharmaceuticals. So this is how people would make friends, and it's like they would try to, oh, hey, I feel great. Yeah, that just numbs things up and gets rid of all of the smelling problems. Oh, that's fantastic. Can I get some more? Well, of course you could. So now all of a sudden you have your elites, basically, deciding who they like based upon different things. And there's nothing like something to break the ice, so to speak, if people are giving away generous quantities of pharmaceuticals. Not necessarily because they were worth a whole lot of money. Pharmaceuticals were far cheaper comparatively than what they are today. But they were not necessarily as readily as accessible as you might think. So that was part of the problem. So, and also, well, who has the best solution along those lines? So people were very impressed. And of course, there was still an inherent value to the newest best thing and whatnot. So you had people doing deals, and then they would say, oh, well, we got some other territorial business deals that we want to do in some of these other countries. So we're going to go ahead and involve some other players that might want to get on board on our startups. So today people would understand, yeah, the startup AI, this, that would really be something that would be impressive to invest in. Well, it was kind of sort of the same thing back then. So when you get an array of players together, they would explain it. Well, we have an array of players, and we're backed by government, and we're backed by numerous people of means. We're going to make this happen, and we want to put chemical plants and pharmaceutical companies all around the world. And we want to guarantee that we can get involved in, well, continuing types of very lucrative operations. So they were constantly attracting new investors. This is something that would just keep going and going. So here we have an understanding of some of the methodology that these people were involving themselves in. And today, there's a lot of people that really don't understand what was in motion in 1840 to 1860. Because there's literally these samples involving the Germans noticing what ends up occurring in the Civil War, for instance. You go to the Civil War in the United States, and Europe was shocked. The British were shocked. The Germans were shocked. The Europeans were shocked. They're like, wow, they made these things out of metal, and they go under the water. Okay, so submarine technology was a shocker. And metal turrets, again, they were a shocker. And eventually you find remarks about the Germans and the British making notes in their journals and whatnot, and things that occurred at parties. And there were jokes that were going around about the stupidity of America because the sonic vibrations from cannonballs bouncing off the turrets were literally destroying people's nervous systems. I mean, you're talking about people in the service. You have people in the Navy. They're being ruined for life. This is a whole different meaning than being shell-shocked. It's one thing to have bombs going off near you, which can blow up your eardrums, do all kinds of damage. But being inside of a bell when somebody keeps hitting it with a sledgehammer is considered the ultimate stupidity. And this is how the British and the Germans actually viewed this emergence of this technology. But they'd also hide. There's other references. They were also scared to death of it because these are iron holes. I mean, everybody's going to make things out of wood, and all of a sudden, here comes America. Look, we've made a iron turret, and cannonballs bounce off of this. That's a scary concept when people are going, oh, wow, wait a minute. We can't just hit it with 10 cannonballs and it's destroyed. No, they're going to bounce right off. This is scary. This is a major upgrade. And with subs, it's something similar because, again, you're talking about something that goes underwater. You can't see it. If it gets near you when you're anywhere in a bay, for instance, at night, these things can come right up on you and you can't do anything about it. You can't see them. You don't know that they're there. And they're going to end up sticking a bomb to your hole. And boom, you're going to the bottom. So, we did this in the Revolutionary War as well. We used something called the turtle. And that's quite interesting. So Americans moving forward with submarine technology was a big deal. And when you have areas such as an understanding about filament winding, see, composite technology has been known for thousands of years. You go all the way back earlier than the Egyptians even. So you would make a composite bow. Composite technology as a construction technique was known. Now, it was kind of time consuming, but you still used a form of that understanding when you would put wooden ships together. So if I'm going to try to fast forward this, we got to the point where somebody intercepted some of the deep sides of some of the things we were doing. And sometimes people would share things and boast. They would use information in different ways. So we came up with a way to basically filament wind a submarine and then incorporate cork into it and rewind it again. So you would end up with a structure that basically would absorb sound. It would absorb that sonic vibration. It would dull it. And this became scary because when the Germans realized that we had this technology, it scared them. And it scared the British when the British found out about it too. And it's up in the air as exactly how that information may have gotten passed. Eventually, you find one method where it's being talked about because then everybody kind of sort of knew about it. Well, within certain circles. But if I jump to the reason why we didn't use it in the Civil War, it's very simple. Congress actually did debate about it. Well, some members of Congress and the military, they debated about it because we knew we could do it. And yes, it was expensive, and yes, it was time consuming. And bottom line is, we fast forward to the bottom line was, the decision why we didn't do it was because we needed an immediate solution. So going with steel was the fastest way to get the job done. It wasn't the expense part. It was the length of time it was going to take to make the mechanisms, to do the filament winding, to add the cork. So the British basically were getting wind of this, and they were scared to death, and so were the Germans. And the Germans came up with an ingenious plan. The Germans were designing a future to basically use submarines and packs and build them out of steel because they felt it could be done cheaply. And when the British discovered that the Germans later when the British discovered this, they confronted the Germans, and the Germans would make jokes about it. Oh yeah, we have certain factions. We've got these guys who are like all impressed about these stupid death traps that the Americans built. So we're catering to them to get them off of our back. So we're throwing them some peanuts and letting them play around with this stuff for a while. But come on, how are we going to use something like that and go against a royal battleship, the Royal Navy of Britain? How are we going to possibly compete with something like that? These are not vessels to be able to compete against war fleets, against battleships. Come on, we know this. And the British laughed. They laughed and laughed and laughed. They thought it was funny. So the Germans get off the hook by letting out a little bit of stuff, but they withheld key information as to their actual long-term plans and goals. And this is where the RGE Spy Institute comes into play heavier and heavier, because they had a long-term plan of literally developing pack attack technologies. Their whole idea was to get these submarines to travel long distances and to basically go into harbors and catch ships outside of a harbor and surface and have a cannon on board them and tell them, look, we've got a cannon, we've got some guns, you can either surrender to us and give us the boat, give us your ship, or we'll send you to the bottom and you're done. And this could be done with a cannon. The concepts of torpedoes were also being considered, but at first, when the concepts were first evaluated, there was a lot more that had to be done. Of course, eventually this did come into fruition. We ended up with balanced systems. So the Germans were enormously afraid of the United States. So they involved themselves in policies because they decided that they wanted to attack not only the United States, but anyone in the world. They built a secret plan to stop any form of other competing respective to chemicals, chemical plants, respective to filament winding, using fibers, processing adhesives, processing any form of catalyst, anything that would have to do with composite technology development or deployment. And these fragments, finding these fragments are really where you have the big intent discovery. It unveils this incredible intent of what RGE was planning for a very, very long time. It changes the entire game of what was going on and when it was going on, when it started. Because submarine pack attack sciences have references that go all the way back to the 1860s. I'm not joking about this. They were on board very, very quickly with this. And the Germans also, along with other parties, had also thought about submarine technology. The United States was not the only one, and there were other parties who actually built submarines earlier. There are other examples to it. So these campaigns that RGE would enter into in the United States were to gain leverage, to gain privileges and powers. They wanted exclusive rights for chemical plants, for munitions plants. They wanted to get deep into the pockets of politicians. They wanted to bribe as many people as they could. They wanted to find ways to leverage in to these people to get any kind of information they could use to blackmail them. Anything and everything that could possibly be part of a useful resource. They wanted it. So propaganda campaigns in the United States that were funded by the RGE are something a lot of people don't actually study. Some people do. So finding those fragments every so often gives you key insight to find out how RGE Spy Institute was manipulating the game, how they would keep changing informations in stages so that they could keep things on a need to know. So hopefully you could deceive people as much as you could. You could come up with excuses of why you were doing what it is you were doing. In many cases, it was just as simple as, hey, we've got a business idea here and we want to make money. And hey, we're opening this. Anybody who wants on board, wants to buy stock, we're all going to make money. It's a good thing. We're going to make money. We're going to create jobs. This is a good thing. It's a win-win deal. So you had a lot of this occurring in the United States. Now, what's the down and the flip side? The down and the flip side is they want exclusive territory. That means that they wanted more governance invented Pacific to basically guarantee that they would have exclusive territories. This means they would end up encouraging legislation to be created to literally take rights away from American citizens. They didn't want you to actually be able to grow herbs, medicinal items, literally in your backyard or on your farm. They worked out these very clever ideas to either eliminate your rights or create a series of protocols, licensing and whatnot. And they were very crafty about the way they did it, to say, oh, well, we need to have quality control. And we want to need this and we need that. And there was a certain brilliance about it, but understanding the original core orders, the core design, the spy department area, to understand the original mindsets of what they were using to work with the material is a crucial factor to understand. So here I've just laid out part of another mechanism that has very early origins and the clear hiding of original intent respective to RGE Spy Institute, as well as certain key partners. So this is really a big deal. And people don't understand how when you end up having two great wars and you capture lots and lots of material and you catch a lot of different people in various business arrangements. And of course, in many cases, it's like, okay, look, we got this information right here. Can you explain why these words are on this slip of paper right here, or this ledger, or, like that, Look at this ledger here. Give you an example. Here's a ledger. Look right here. Look how much money they gave to Lenin and Joseph Stalin. Oh, and Karl Marx. People don't understand. All three of them were on two payrolls. They were on the RGE Spy Institute payrolls. They were spies, as well as syndicate payroll, syndicate partnership. In other words, these people were on the oligarch list. So a lot of people that don't understand this and the importance of when you find these data fragments as to what it means, and you find these other fragments to understand the base intent of what people are doing. Because it's crucial, because incredibly diabolical intent goes much further back, and the depravity of it is of vastly far wider scope than some people initially believed. And this is important to understand the evolution of tactical madness, great darkness, of evil psychiatrist, military grade, that would be engineering, making material, engineering, making things such as, well, Karl Marx, for instance. Karl Marx, his material is not original. Again, he's a paid spy connected to the German Empire Spy Institute. All of his work is a construct. It was painstakingly engineered to be something. To emphasize it at the simplest, imagine a Venus flytrap. If you've never seen a Venus flytrap, immediately go look one up. It invites the fly to come land, and then it closes around it and traps it. And then it slowly consumes everything, all the fluids, everything about the fly, everything. So understanding these base properties is a raw beginning understanding of what the mechanism symmetry respectively is when I'm talking about RGE Spy Institute and its various associates. So it's important to understand these fragments of information when they pop up, because it changes the framework and the depth far more. And it explains a lot of things. When you find out that there was different rooms, room after room after room, in different types of materials, custom-made books, hundreds of people working to make custom-made tactical spy books. These are masters of mind control, working with every possible tool they could get their hands on. But keep in mind, today we see some of these drug cartels doing things, and we look at them and they have lots of money, they end up with lots of weapons, and they have incredible power. They exert a lot of power, and some people don't understand the allure of how powerful people can get when you can take something that's apparently worth $100, but you can make it for $1. That's a really, really big deal. So understanding this is easy today. Many people are like, okay, I can kind of see that. But back in 1840, 1860, 1870, 1880, the Royal German Empire Spy Institute utilizing these various techniques were almost invisible. There were people that figured out some of it from the surface. You had writings by people in Britain saying, yes, they're running around and they're, if I change the language and make a joke out of it, I can say, yeah, they're running around trading dope. They're making it wholesale for next to nothing and they're trading it and people are getting excited. So this is something that basically is very important to understand because it frames things out in a total different understanding. Because when you realize the scale of the mechanism, the multiality factors of buy all the data that you can get from doctors, pretend that you're helping the future of humanity as you're doing it. But the bottom core thing is we want all the data. We want all of the data, regardless of how much it's going to cost us. Now, once you have the data, what do? You have the data and you turn and go, okay, let's rework the data and keep selling it worldwide. It's very lucrative, by the way. They made incredible profits. That's where you find notes where we made 600, 1,200% on our money selling the data. So an entire funded operation to get a hold of the data has realization of incredible profits all by themselves. All by themselves. Why? They're simply reworking the data. You've got people who have companies, they make books. They make dictionaries, encyclopedias, travel guides, you name it. People would make something. And what do you need to make something like that, written material? You need a lot of data. And there's one thing that the Germans figured a way to lever in very big, and that's data. So they also stole things. They basically took every instrument that they could get, and they used scholastic test of testing people, saying, who are the best writers in the world? Who are the best poets of all time? What are the most meaningful statements? Again, I think at this point you're starting to get a feel of the depth of what I'm talking about, of how they work this data to find the most valuable unicogs and how they would apply to any given demographic territory, every zone. So this information, again, they would go to companies and say, hey, look, we have some really good data on sales scripts for your salespeople, techniques, and really great data on customers. Look, we have complete data on all these people. We have their medical files, and we rework them into knowing things. And we've made maps. And we can tell you that within this certain district or zip code, that X number of people like to buy red shirts, or white shirts, or red dresses, or blue dress, whatever it is. And all of a sudden, anybody who's a salesman, regardless of what the product is, says, oh, wait a minute, this data could be valuable. What do you want for this? So now you can begin to see the enormity of the markets surrounding data.
Now today,